welcome back. Today I'm going to be taking you through the baby wipe technique. Ladies who were booked into the June class will recognise these cards. These were the two cards that we were going to make way back in June before restrictions kicked in. We'll start with this card, which uses this lovely stamp set called Sailing Home. It has a set of coordinating dies, and I will also be using this size of the stitched rectangles. For the baby wipe technique, you need a baby wipe or two. Because the stamp I'm using today is quite small, I really only need one, and I'm going to fold it up to make my own stamp pad. So the baby wipes need to be pretty moist. I like to use my stamp and some black ink just to very lightly stamp onto the baby wipe so that I have some idea of exactly the size and that I need. Now for this we do need ink refills, and here I have the three colours I've chosen, which are Night of Navy, Coastal Cabana and Smoky Slate. Using the ink refills, you just need to drop a few drops in and around your image. Now I would say that you really need to make sure that you're not too heavy-handed. Just adding the last colour. Now you can see that there's some space between my dots, but as we ink that up, you will find that the colours will spread. So I'm just going to have a play with it first of all and see how it's looking, see whether we need more colour. I know that looks pretty good to me. So you can see the Smoky Slate, the Coastal Cabana and the Night of Navy quite clearly. So that's great. I have my pieces of cardstock pre-cut. This is for the front, one for the inside of the card, and I also have my envelope here so that we can stamp it as well. So we'll do the inside of the card and the envelope first and get them out of the way. I'm just going to put my stamp down here in the corner of my envelope, and also in the corner of my inside panel. Okay, I'm happy with those, so they can be popped away. Now, with this panel, which is going to be the front of our card, I started in the middle. And worked out. It doesn't need to be too exact. But the one thing I would say, I'm just going to add a little tiny bit more Smoky Slate over here. The one thing I would say is that to get a nice consistent pattern or repeating pattern, you do need to stamp off the edge a bit. So here I'll line up, but I will stamp off the edge. Not quite lined up, but as I said, it's just a repeating pattern. And we'll start filling in the gaps. This is a lovely technique for images such as this one, or floral images that have a bit more texture in them, that are a bit harder to colour. This way you can add your colour without having to watercolour or use your blends. It's a really lovely effect. Just lining these up as evenly as I can, stamping in between each circle. And last one. So there's our first panel complete. I can see I've done that upside down. There we go, fixed. I would suggest that while you still have your little ink pad made, it's a good idea to have some additional panels of basic white cut, ready to go, and you can stamp them up and use them to create different cards. So here are the two cards that I made side by side. Very similar. This one, the image is a little bit more spaced out than this one, but they both look great. So stamp up some extra panels. You may not use them straight away, but they're there, ready to go when you next need a card. To finish up my card, I need to add a little bit of blending to this panel. And the blending is going to sit behind the lighthouse. So the blending just needs to be quite light down the centre of your panel. So pick up the colour, get the main bit off, and then bring it to your piece of basic white and just gently apply the colour until you're happy with it. I'm actually pretty happy with that, so I'll leave that. I'm also going to add my birds into the top corner of my panel. And now it's time to add our lighthouse, our wheel, and our greeting. Now I'm a fan of liquid glue, so I will be using that to put my pieces on to my back panel. The thing with liquid glue is you don't need to apply too much. It's a very strong glue, and just little beads of it work perfectly. So here, just a few odd, I'm not even squeezing, I'm just touching the nozzle onto the back of my wheel. Going to lay that along the side of my lighthouse. And then this one I'm going to add, the sentiment I'm going to add with dimensionals. Okay, time to add the panel to the front of our standard note card. Again, I'm using a fine bead of liquid glue. I find, particularly when putting a panel like this onto the front of a card, the liquid glue just gives you a little bit of time to ensure that all your margins are nice and even. A little bit of size in it so that it can move around so that you're happy with your placement. Pop some dimensionals on the back of this one. You're probably laughing at the number of dimensionals I use, but I just think that particularly if the card is being posted, it needs to be able to stand up to a bit of pressure. So I do use a lot of dimensionals. So now pop this onto the front of our card. I've put it in, placing it in the bottom left corner, and I'm looking to make sure that I've got some nice even margin there along the side and across the bottom. Then we have our piece to put inside. As I said, I did stamp them upside down, so I'm just going to turn it round and the piece will be in the top corner instead of the bottom corner, but the recipient won't know that I made it upside down. Again, looking to make sure that all my margins are nice and even. And there we have our card with our matching envelope using the baby wipe technique. The thing you will notice with this technique is that no two cards are the same. So here on this one I made quite some time ago, I obviously used more Coastal Cabana. So it has a sort of more blue tone to it, whereas this one has more grey and navy tones to it. I was also more heavy-handed here with the Coastal Cabana behind the lighthouse. But when I look at them, I like them both. I probably prefer this one. I think the tones in this one are nice. Both thank you cards. This greeting came from another set, and so this time I decided to use the one that was actually in the Sailing Home stamp set. I wanted to show you a little trick before we went on to the next card that I used to ensure that my greetings fit perfectly inside my die cut. So I have little stencils made for most of the dies that I use for labels. I've positioned the stamp onto the plate of the Stamparatus and stamped it onto a scrap piece of paper. I've now got my little stencil, which I'm going to carefully line up so that I am happy with how it looks. Secure that with a magnet. Now I have lots of these cut out, the little die cuts. You can place that into your stencil. Ink up your greeting. Stamp. And there you have a nice straight greeting in the middle of your die cut. Works every time. Moving on to card number 2. This is card number 2. It uses the Tasteful Touches Cling Stamp set. Tasteful Touches dies, this one here. I have also embossed the back panel using the Tasteful Textile embossing panel. There is an additional layer of vellum here that I cut out using this die from the All Night Labels dies. You will notice these little Blushing Bride dots. They were created with this little dotty stamp from the Artistically Inked stamp set, but there are lots and lots of stamp sets that have got little dots and things in it, so you could find one of those in your stash, I'm sure. And the panel that we're about to ink up was cut out with the third largest of the stitched rectangles. Just like in the first card, I'm actually going to start by lightly inking up my stamp in the black and putting it down onto the baby wipe. Now I do this so that I've got some idea of where to lay down the colour. Now that I have the basic outline, I can apply the colour in the areas that I want. So I want the middle to be more of the polished pink. So that's one of the colours I'm using. These darker pieces where you can see there's shadow, I'm using Sahara Sand. Just trying to mimic where the stamp has indicated that there would be shadow. So that's Sahara Sand. And then the last colour I'm using is Blushing Bride. And so the petals would be where I would want the blushing bride to be. Again, don't add too much colour. It's easier to add it later. So let's stamp this and start to spread it and see what happens. And stamp off here, check. Oh, that's looking very nice, but I'm just going to add some more Blushing Bride over here. Oops. And we can try again. Oh, that looks lovely. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So now we can start our panel. Now, last time in the first card, we did an all over pattern, a repeating pattern. This time, we're actually going to just do a scattered pattern. Now, probably what you need to know when you're doing a scatter pattern is that you need to really work in odd numbers. So, like with my card, as you can see, I've done the 3 flowers and they're all slightly going off the edge. Now, we're going to cut this panel down in a minute. So let's just have a play. I'll put this one here. This one close to it, but going off the edge a bit. And this one I'm going to put down the bottom so that I've left a space for my greeting. So I want this one going this way. And that looks terrific. Okay, while we've got our ink pad ready. I'm going to stamp the inside panel. This time I'm going to get it up the right way. I'm going to have it just coming off the edges slightly. So that's for the inside of our card. And I'm going to do the envelope as well. Okay. Now we just need to add some of the Blushing Bride dots to our original panel. Just pop them in and around your original flowers. You can put as many or as few as you like. I'm probably just going to do about 2 groupings per flower. Perhaps another couple in between here. It's hard to tell sometimes. We'll see how that looks. We can always add some a little bit later. Now I'm just going to go and cut that out with this die. So probably around about there. Looks like a good placement to me. So I'll be back in a minute. Now that I've die cut that out, I can see I need one more little group of dots in this little section here. Okay. Now it's time to put the card together. We have a base of Sahara Sand. We have a matte of early Espresso, and then we have a matte of Basic White, which, as I said before, has been embossed with the Tasteful Textures embossing folder. I will add these all together. Making sure that I have a nice even margin all around. We can also add the panel inside. And now it's time to lay up our vellum piece, our panel. Now, I usually put the panel onto the vellum first because then it tells me whereabouts on the vellum I can add my adhesive so it won't be seen. So I'll just pop a little bit of adhesive behind here and hold that for a minute. A little bit here and hold that. And then when we turn that over, we can see where we can put the adhesive so that it's not going to be seen through the vellum. Go. Because I'm sticking this down to a textured background, you probably need to just hold it for a moment. So this is my sentiment panel. I've stamped a greeting, die cut it, and then to the back I've added a triple bow. I've put it in the centre at the back and it's attached with a glue dot. And then I have my dimensionals placed in and around the loops, ready to be put onto the front of my card. And there we have our second card. I love all the layers. The vellum really adds, as does the textured background. So, second card, the inside, and the matching envelope. So here's a comparison between the two cards. These two are actually very similar. I've just added linen thread behind this one and added some polished pink gems. This one used a twine that I think is now retired. So here's the card we made today. But while I had my little multicoloured stamp pad ready, I used it to stamp some basic white panels, and you can see two other cards that I've made here. This one I did a very similar pattern to the card we did today, but then I blended around the edges with the Sahara Sand, a gold border, the same Tasteful Textiles embossing folder. This greeting is also, You Are the Best, is also from the Tasteful Touches stamp set. A little bit of gold ribbon behind, and that was another card. This one, in amongst the floral images, I also used some of the texture images from the stamp set, the leaf and this filigree, to add in amongst. So the filigree, I also used the multicoloured ink pad, but the floral I just did in the Sahara Sand. I used the same greeting, but this time I cut it out with a different die from the Tasteful Labels die set, this large one here, and I just had it running off the panel. Also added some of the polished pink rhinestones, gems. Behind there is a vellum die cut, and that comes from the Forever Flourishing dies. It's this large piece here. But I'm sure that you've all got label dies and lots of little bits and pieces that you could use to replicate a card very similar to this one. The other thing I want to highlight is this set of dies. This set of dies sits on my craft table because I use it so often. It is such a range, from circles and banners, pennants. It's just a wonderful set and well worth looking into if you're looking for a set of dies that are going to be able to cut out all of your different greetings. Now before I go, I just wanted to show you how I tie my bows. I actually leave the thread on the spool. I take the thread across my hand, round my index finger, under my middle finger, round my index finger, under my middle finger, over, 4, come back under, and pull it nice and tight. And that gives me these lovely double or triple, or you can even make them single if you prefer, flouncy sort of bows that I use on a lot of my cards. I'll do it again for you. Thread across your hand, round your index finger, underneath your middle finger, round your index finger, under your middle finger, over all and through your 2 fingers. Then pick this one up, and so it's over and under that one. You can see that you've created this knot, if you like. Pull it tight, pull it down, and your flouncy bow. You can then cut it off at whatever length you like. Thanks for joining me this week. I hope you enjoyed learning about the baby wipe technique and the other little tips and tricks along the way. I look forward to joining you again next week with another video. Bye for now.